Satanic Panic is based on unfounded beliefs around Satanism. I will be demonstrating how these beliefs are actually a method of oppression, especially for women. Satanism should actually be read as a form of rebellion against the Christian patriarchy. So what is Satanism? Satanism can actually be defined as an anti-religion. Most satanic groups don't worship a higher power or believe in any external godly figure. And many sociologists agree that what defines religion is the belief or worship in something greater than the self. But, if anything, Satanism is solely a worship of the self, and of all things scientific. Unlike the Catholic Church, who believe there to be a power beyond science, Satanism applauds the idea of modernity, materialism, and scientific advancements. Satanism began in the Old Testament. Lucifer was the fallen angel, the bringer of light that was banished from the kingdom of heaven. Soon, Satan appeared again as a snake in the Garden of Eden, tricking Eve into eating an apple. Many satanic scholars claim this apple represents scientific knowledge that would disprove God's mysterious ways. And to many female Satanists, it also represents Eve's liberation from the patriarchal Christian belief system. During the 80s, rumors about ritualized pedophilia and satanic cults in daycare centers were spread. But these rumors were entirely unfounded. The so-called child victims were often silenced by the many therapists and parents accusing other women and daycare owners of child sacrifice and ritualized pedophilia. The ironic thing is, the only ritualized pedophilia that has actual proof to support its claims is found within the Catholic Church. And almost all of the sex offenders are men, not women. All wickedness is but little next to the wickedness of women, says the noted 15th century witch hunter's manual, Malleus Maleficarum. This text was popular during the 1500s and served as one of the main reasons why so many women were tried as witches. It pushed the idea that women used so-called sorcery as a way of gaining power over men because they were the weaker sex. The notion of women as the devil's accomplice is prominent throughout Christian history and was used to legitimize the subordination of wives and daughters. From the early decades of the 14th century until 1650, continental Europeans executed between 200,000 and 500,000 witches, 85% or more of whom were women. And according to feminist sociologists, medieval Europe required women to stick to their traditional gender roles, i.e., they must be married and have children, and they mustn't express their sexuality in any way. Any woman that fell outside of these norms was accused of witchcraft. And just as the witch hunts persecuted women who were going against their traditional role as forged by the patriarchy, women were also persecuted as a result of the Satanic Panic of the 80s and 90s. The women's liberation movement began in the 60s and continued well into the 80s. There was mass outrage against the notion of the 1950s housewife, a woman whose only job was child-rearing and chores. This is why so many women in the 50s were miserable, and why so many of them were addicted to prescription drugs. Female hysteria became a term used to discredit the lived experiences of women in the 50s, by instead just labeling them as crazy. Unfortunately, women trying to take their power back just didn't sit right with a lot of people, especially under Reagan's ideals. The Reagan era was all about a return to the traditional patriarchal family model. And this conflict between the liberation of women and Reagan's ideals created anime. According to Durkheim, anime is essentially a breakdown of normal societal rules. From a structural functionalist perspective, people inhabit certain roles in a society in order for it to function properly. This is why Parsons, a functional sociologist, was so big on the nuclear family. Women were meant to manage the domestic sphere, whilst men the economic sphere. Moreover, according to sociologist Howard Becker, women entering the workplace could be seen as a form of deviance, and therefore requires sanctions as it transgresses the norms for the time. Deviance in this case isn't anything inherently bad or harmful. Deviance is simply a label given to anything that defies conventions, and women gaining power was definitely an example of this. This was what Satanic Panic was all about. As more women were entering the workplace and gaining more economic power, more children were being left in daycare centres. And this anime created moral panic. Women who ran these daycare centres were taken to court. And just as witches who were accused of practicing black magic weren't actually practicing any form of witchcraft, many women ended up serving sentences for crimes they didn't commit. Satanic urban legends still exist to this day. QAnon is a group that claims so-called deep state politicians and the Hollywood elite are involved in a large child abduction network that harvests the chemical compound adrenochrome, which is obtained from the oxidation of adrenaline from supposed sexually abused children subjected to satanic rituals. QAnon say that adrenochrome is consumed by some Democratic politicians and Hollywood elites for its psychedelic and anti-aging effects. An article titled "Many in Power Worship the Devil" asserts that one power, the Republicans, discusses God, while the other power, the Democrats, discusses darkness. The parallel between Satanic Panic and QAnon's theories about Democrats are very strong. Both created moral panic as a response to the supposed threat against right-wing ideals. It's a recurring theme throughout history. Religion and the societal norms tied to it become a force of destruction when it's being challenged. All of these events, the witch hunts, Satanic Panic, and QAnon, all of them were trying to taint the image of social change. It's not like we have a tolerance for trans people or gay people or sex workers, we just don't care, says the leader of the Satanic Temple, Lucian Greaves. This is because the 7 tenets of Satanism are based on bodily autonomy, empathy, and freedom. In fact, at least half of the leadership for the Satanic Temple are LGBT. As I mentioned in the beginning, some feminist Satanists interpret Satan as the liberator for women, i.e., the apple represents Eve learning all about God's tyrannical, patriarchal ways. One of them being that Eve was simply made from the rib of Adam, and therefore were intended to be subservient to men. So the moral panic surrounding Satanism could be read as an attempt by right-wing Christians to stop any kind of rebellion against these oppressive narratives. The witch hunts were also an example of this. Women who were previously known to be wise or healers were accused of witchcraft. It's as if any kind of power that women attain is immediately shut down. Despite their fight for freedom, some satanic groups have come under scrutiny as being a proponent of neo-Nazism and sexism. Although this type of Satanism is few and far between, the Order of the Nine Angels is an example of a satanic group which actually bears more similarities to right-wing Christianity. For example, both Christianity and the Order of the Nine Angels are theistic religions, meaning they worship and believe in the being known as Satan from the Bible. Theism isn't found in the majority of satanic groups, most of whom use Satan as a symbol instead for freedom and atheism. Moreover, there have been many reports of women across different satanic organizations being ignored or silenced by men. This completely goes against Satanism's core beliefs of freedom and bodily autonomy. And this really shouldn't be the case considering women are the primary targets of religious control, like having reproductive rights being taken away or becoming a victim of crazy superstitions. It seems as though patriarchal values have found their way into every religious system. Although the majority of satanic groups are very accepting, few of them are missing the point for a lot of its non-male, non-white members. In fact, before Eve, there was Lilith, who was Adam's first wife. Lilith completely fled the Garden of Eden and her marriage to Adam as she was forced to be subservient to him. Because of this, she was cursed by God and turned into a demon, all because she demanded freedom from the oppressive Christian power structure. And, according to Renée Vivien, an 18th century lesbian poet, both Lucifer and Lilith are the symbols for liberation for both women and LGBT people. And this is what Satanism should be all about, a place to find freedom from other forms of religious oppression.